As long as you are convinced you have never done anything, you can never do anything. Malcolm X. Welcome to the We Don't Believe You podcast series. Our mission is to neutralize and dispel the false narratives, negative images, and disparaging stereotypes that have been perpetuated about Black people through various media outlets for centuries. Each week, we will highlight stories of Black excellence, greatness, and success of the past, present, and future, all of which share one common trait. They chose not to believe the negative images or stereotypes that said they couldn't succeed, but instead achieved massive success in spite of them. And now, here's your host, Brian McCoy.
So so you get the doctorate. 2017, you co-found the research initiatives for the strategic empowerment of the urban populace. Rise Up.
Right.
So tell us about the mission of Rise Up and kind of the mission, its function, and its purpose.
So the mission of Rise Up extends from a lot of the scholarly research that I've done about the roles that Black intellectuals have played in the Black freedom struggle over the course of the past couple of centuries. Although oftentimes when we think about the Black freedom struggle, the image that most readily comes to mind is ordinary grassroots protesters out on the streets raising their hands in dissent and expressing their objections to the status quo. The reality is that those protests are often made possible by the work of intellectuals, organizers who are quietly doing the planning and strategizing that's required to prosecute a struggle over the course of decades, if not across the generations. And so, if we were to talk about the Black freedom struggle, there's no way that we could fail to mention a litany of African American intellectuals, both men and women, starting with W.E.B. Du Bois and, E. Franklin Frazier, Carter G. Woodson, Charles S. Johnson, Charles Wesley, Alain Locke, so many, including lots of women who aren't named. And so I believe that the role of intellectuals is so important that I founded Rise Up, Research Initiatives for the Strategic Empowerment of the Urban Populace, with the goal of trying to get people like myself who have advanced degrees that have equipped them with research skills to use those to do some of the kind of high-level research and analysis that's required to successfully implement civic projects in the communities that we live. For example, right now, Brian, we find ourselves in the midst of on the cusp of a clean energy revolution, whose aim is to try to reduce the amount of carbon pollution that we're producing. And the Biden administration has taken significant strides to provide funding for the clean energy revolution, and to do it in such a way that it ensures Black communities of color here in the U.S., get their equitable share of this money. This past summer, your brother and I, if I can share this with the audience.
Sure, please.
Became aware of a grant program known as the Solar for All program, which provided over $7 billion in funds to solarize or convert carbon pollution producing home energy systems that you tend to find in Black communities and replace them with solar programs of one kind or the other. In order to get this money, though, Black people need to be prepared to take the initiative that's required to identify grant funds, to do the high-level demanding planning and logistics that are required to pull together all of the different elements that are required to successfully shepherd this project from inception, when it's just an idea, to its practical implementation. And so part of that process is doing the necessary background research that allows you to pinpoint important demographic, factors that you're required to take into consideration. For example, where are the homes that are identified as disadvantaged homes, comprised of large number of African Americans and other disadvantaged groups. If you can't say where those neighborhoods are, then you're at a competitive disadvantage. You're not likely to be able to implement the grant. You got to be able to identify those areas that have been exposed to high levels of toxins of one kind or the other. That information is available. It's out there somewhere, and it's actually free. You get it. I could download it for you right now. But you also, in order for communities to get the money that's required to address this, they need to be able to translate this information into clear analysis that's going to persuade decision makers, funders, that, hey, these people are eligible for this money, their communities have been hard hit, and they have a concrete plan that convinces us that they're going to be able to responsibly manage this money so that it addresses the real problems that this community is confronted with. And so Rise Up's mission is to provide the post-civil rights generation, you and us, of organizers, activists, social entrepreneurs, with strategic information that's going to be needed in order to implement civic projects of the size and scale that's needed to address the problems that we have.
So I guess my next question was, what problems does Rise Up solve? But you just kind of answered it, because without Rise Up or an organization with Rise Up's mission statement, a lot of communities are going to miss out on a lot of resources, opportunities, simply because the research has not been done. If I'm understanding you correctly.
Listen, look, we live in the information age, an age where, for some time now, ideas and information are a driving force in our economy and in our society. One of the chief obstacles to Black advance is the fact that we really don't have any well-funded research outfits that do analysis of the challenges that confront our community on an ongoing basis. In the United States of America and many advanced Western industrial societies, the sector that's responsible for doing such analysis on an ongoing basis is, comprised of professional think tanks. It's what one scholar recently referred to as the Fifth Estate. The group of organizations that do regular, ongoing scientific research for the purpose of trying to craft policy solutions to the problems that we face. And if you actually do a survey of the makeup of the current Fifth Estate here in the United States, what you'll find is that there are, not surprisingly, relatively few think tanks that are funded and managed and led by Black leaders. One of the few is the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies at Howard University. But, so really what's going on with the Black community? The Black community really is, has entered the 21st century rather rudderless. We're almost flying into a black hole which is bereft of any kind of, um, you know, any kind of markers to tell us the direction in which we need to go. And it is institutes of scientific research in an information age which have to play a leading role if we're going to figure out what the lay of the land is in the communities that we live in, identify the problems that confront black people, and come up with a set of policy solutions that we are actually capable of supporting. If, for example, we were to want to get any detailed about the condition of the black community in Westchester County, which is home to some of the most successful black communities in the United States of America, we would be hard pressed to do this. Right now, I'll give you an example, Brian. Right now, one of the few black elected men who represent black community in the U.S. Congress is now in a sort of life and death battle as his re-election contest looms, and I'm referring to Congressman Jamal Bowman. Even though there's a great deal of concern that Congressman Bowman could lose this election because he faces very well-funded, well-organized, sophisticated opponent in the person of County Executive George Latimer, who happens to be white. My sense is that the black community has made few concerted, organized efforts to mobilize the immense number of voters in Westchester County. One reason why, because we don't know where they actually live. Like, we don't have generally detailed information. Who do you know in the black community today that could put together a list of voters right here in our area, by the way, Brian, right here in Runyon Heights, where we are in close proximity to one another? My sense is very few. As someone who works in Westchester County in activist formations, my sense is very few. So we really lack the wherewithal that's required to take advantage of a lot of open source information. The census and all other kind of organizations publish all the time, so that we can do strategic planning that identifies problems that we have, possible solutions, how we attract money, capital to address those, how we mobilize members of the black community to wage the political struggles that must be waged if we're to press ahead. So I think that's a major shortfall in our community. And so Rise Up is trying to do that, at the local level here in Westchester County.
So how has so much time been able to pass without other rise ups? Is it just no one's noticed? I can't imagine no one's noticed the void.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just we noticed the void? And I just can't see being with this such a blaring, I guess, void in the black community. How has it gone on for so long?
Well, I think because most Americans, to be honest with you, not just African Americans, don't really have a accurate understanding of the way that policy making occurs here in the United States, and a total lack of appreciation of the vital role that think tanks play in this entire process. My sense is, unfortunately, of the black community is that the black community has largely abandoned the idea that a collective effort is either required or capable of bringing about the kind of transformation that's required in our society. So I don't think we take our politics very seriously, nor do we've long ago abandoned the recognition that we need to create an array of independent black institutions to carry out many of these vital tasks. So to start with, even though it was once the case that local black leaders would have operated some sort of independent political club, some sort of political organizations, clubs, often an adjunct of one of the two major parties, or when communism was, really seriously a serious option in the United States, even, sort of communist-oriented clubs. So we don't have any political clubs. That's the first thing. And I can assure you, as someone who is a student of local history, the earlier generations had independent political clubs which served as the center of coordination and control of any efforts in electoral efforts that black people would have made to try to leverage our voting power. We have fewer and fewer civic organizations that were once the primary vehicle through which, and my sense is, at least at the beginning of the 20th century, more middle class blacks, through which they operated projects, programs of various kinds to attend to the civic needs of black America. And then finally, we've allowed the newspapers that once were a vital channel of communication between the black public and the larger American public to go extinct. And the number and quality of news outfits that are in operation, in black-led and owned news outfits that are in operation today, pale by comparison to maybe 50 or so years ago, just as the civil rights movement was warming up. And then finally, the last of these things that we, as a community, never fully developed an appreciation for the need to have them as think tanks. There have been some, and they've been, there have been some important black minds behind some of them, but they've been few and far in between. And, as to your question, I think it's because the black public, like the broader American public, I think has a misconception about how our politics works and the role of ideas, research, analysis in it for it to be effective.
Okay, so for everyone's benefit, mine included, exactly what is a think tank?
A think tank is a research outfit that draws on the best available empirical evidence to assess and analyze policy proposals that are being considered by our political elites. So oftentimes, the kind of policies that are enacted through legislation, both in the U.S. Congress and in many of the most important state legislators, are not designed, oftentimes are not designed solely by legislators themselves, but are designed in conjunction with, if not almost exclusively by, policy analysts who are paid by think tanks to draw an immense pool of publicly available data, let's say data about unemployment, to try to assess what kind of policy approaches would be best suited to address the problem of unemployment and to, provide people with more gainful employment. So, specifically, they will compile, analyze, publish data on, for example, the impact of the minimum wage rate on employment prospects. Should we have a high minimum wage or a low minimum wage? You can draw on empirical evidence to see what the best evidence suggests as a way of trying to, advance your position and win support for policies that you're interested in seeing enacted.
Okay. So this is all did rise up, like did you have Rise Up in mind as your kind of an end game when you went through the PhD program, or was it something you discovered after you kind of got in the world?
No, it was something that I discovered as I got in the world and I began to study the lives of earlier generation of black intellectuals. One of the things that one has to conclude is that the most successful of them, the ones that were able to see some of their program implemented, did so by marshaling a tremendous amount of energy that was devoted to research, analysis, and publications. For example, we could take as an example the NAACP, right? It has a considerable amount of its activities, starting with the role of W.E.B. Du Bois as the editor-in-chief of the Crisis magazine, which is still in operation today, along with other staff members, undertook a tremendous amount of research on black life in its many dimensions, and were able to marshal a lot of that research and research that occurred beyond its offices to successfully wage the struggle against Jim Crow, right? I'm sure you know this, Brian, because you are a law student, that the basis, one of the most important bases for the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Brown versus Board of Education was a variety of evidence which had been introduced to the court.
Did you mean to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson?
Well, to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson. I'm sorry. To overturn Plessy versus Ferguson was evidence that social scientists had collected that sought to demonstrate that segregated institutions were inherently harmful. The so-called Dolls experiment that was conducted by Kenneth and Mamie Clark was one of the most important pieces of empirical research that were introduced by the courts, and there was many others. And so this is just one example of the ways in which social scientific research is has become more and more central to our politics, the politics of knowledge, as it's practiced in the 20th century. And to the extent that black people are not actively involved in the production of knowledge for the sake of policy formation, we're at a disadvantage.
So would you say that the black community has just kind of been so put off by, for lack of better words, the degradation of and the subjugation by, for lack of better words, America, that they are at this point just kind of no longer interested or a little jaded about these things, and these things become less and less important to us than because I mean, you're talking about like really in-depth, detailed analyses of the conditions. Do you think that the black community is just no longer, do you think we're just disgusted by everything that's happened to the point where we feel powerless and these think tanks and such have no real value to us?
I think that, yes, black people have succumbed to deep feelings of disillusionment and pessimism and defeatism. And I think for the following reason, look, Brian, because I think on the one hand, I think black people have deluded themselves about the level of effort that was required by previous generations of organizers to overthrow the obstacles that lay in our path. So that, the sense that I get is that there were across the generations, there were cohorts of leaders who we might call race men and race women who devoted an entire life to the struggle. And so, for one, I don't think that the W.E.B. Du Bois would be a good example of this. Du Bois helps to he helps to found the Niagara movement in about 1903. He helps to found the NAACP in 1909, and he dies in Ghana in 1963. I think maybe a day or so after the March on Washington. The man gave it. That's his whole life, brother. His whole life. All his whole life was concerned with is trying to find a way to tear down segregated institutions and, come to new kind of arrangements that are going to allow black people to thrive. I don't know any black people today who want to give their whole life to it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's kind of the question is why do you think there are not?
Well, because listen, for a previous generation of talented black people, there was a ceiling that was placed on how high we could climb, and there were only certain arenas that were available to us. Those of us who had ambitions for leadership, such that invariably someone who was ambitious, they might go into one of these activist organizations in ways that they wouldn't today, because there are so many more opportunities open to the most talented of us. That's one reason. I think another reason is because black Americans are like most other Americans, by which I mean we are just as individualistic, just as concerned about material success as most whites. And to be honest with you, I don't really know black people. I don't know a lot of black people who actually whose first and foremost concern is the well-being of the black community. It is an afterthought and a second occupation at best for most of us. So we might casually do something to help ourselves on our leisure time, but we're not about that life no more.
And so I hate to sound like a little kid with this and keep asking why, but why are we not about that life anymore? In your opinion, or from your perspective?
Right. So one reason why I think that's the case, B, is because, look, the reality is most of us, we're not prepared to make that sacrifice. The payoff in terms of stature is no longer as attractive to us as a regular career. So I think that's one reason why. And most of us feel like, look, right, it's hard for us to reconcile how we're going to enjoy personal success while at the same time attending to the needs of the black community. There are few organizations in place that would even allow that to be a viable choice for a person who actually might consider it. So there are people who would, they're always going to be rare, but there are people who would love, I know plenty of activists who would love to give their life in the struggle and, so that at least they could pay some bills, and maybe half retire when they're in their 70s. But that doesn't seem possible, and so I think that deters people from making sacrifices that they suspect will be too steep a price to pay. But I also think it's because black people have, to me, an overinflated sense of exactly what we are actually doing individually today to advance the struggle, right? So if we take some more recent chapters in the black freedom struggle in the 21st century, like the Black Lives Matters movement, right? And the immense wave of activism that took place during the lockdowns, when there was, that those protests had reached historic highs. You might get the sense, black people might have the sense that what we did, we were out there and we were struggling and blah, blah, and we worked so hard. And then I'm like, yo, you want to tell what? Listen, the best available evidence is that there were more white people in attendance. Absolutely. And even more in terms of absolute numbers than there were black people. And in terms of the proportion of relative communities, white people turned out in at least the same proportion as black people, if not more. So in terms of absolute size and a proportion, my sense is that white people was out in the Black Lives Matter movement protest more than black people was.
That's ill. That's powerful. That's great. So that's a factor. Did you say that was your sense?
No, that's my sense. And the New York Times did a study of it, and this is the study that I have in mind that featured a number of social movement scholars whose work I'm very familiar with. People like Doug McAdams, who have risen to fame for doing studies of different chapters of the Black Freedom Movement, and their sense as historians who have analyzed the empirical data that these by far was the largest protests that we've seen in American history, the Black Lives Matter movement, in terms of the number of cities where they appeared, hundreds of cities, in terms of the number of persons who mobilized and turned up. And they also did analysis of the racial ethnic composition. Now, of the protesters, you can legitimately question whether or not their conclusions are right. And I will confess to you, I've read this in the New York Times, so they didn't present any empirical data. But you know what? Those are people that I know to be good scholars. And yeah, I'm persuaded by what they've said. The reason that this is important, Brian, is the following. Is because, back to my point, I think black people actually believe that we are working harder at struggle than we actually are. We will often say to ourselves, we'll hear in conversations, oh man, we did so much, we did this, that, and the third. Listen, when the civil rights movement was going on, if 10% of black America actively participated in the civil rights struggle, that was a lot. If you had 200,000 people at the March on Washington in '63, that is a fraction of the black community, no less the white community, white allies who were also there. So, a 1,000,000-man march, Farrakhan called. If 1,000,000 men showed up, if it was 2 million, you know how small a number that was? So that a lot of times we, I think, persuade ourselves that we have exerted the maximum effort in the quest for our freedom, when in fact the reality is that about 90% of us participate in no tangible way in many of the efforts that are being undertaken to advance black freedom.
So you're saying it's a matter of I don't have to do it because somebody else is already doing it. Like we're already represented in the we're already represented in the protest game, so I don't have to do it because others already. It's in motion. It's in motion. Do you think that it's also? Do you think that the motion is overestimated as well? So in other words, do you think black people are actually looking at it saying
black people are inactive? They are inactivist. They are activists, not
you're saying it's because, from your perspective, it's because we overestimate the activism already being done.
Yes, and because we take credit for things that we don't actually do, by which I mean by this, right I may be out protesting. No, let's be clear. I was out protesting. Me and your brother and some of us here in Yonkers tried to spearhead an effort to get, this grant money into our community. In other words, we're often taking, because it's a collective effort, we feel the license to take credit for the things that we do, even when we personally don't make a contribution at all. It's like,
there are some people in a protest that will be on the front lines, literally, and I mean literally on the front lines protesting. There are some people that will go to law school. There are some people that will go to medical school with that struggle in mind. And I think that one of the challenges, at least from my perspective with black people, is that it's really like you said, to your point, it's like we did this. And then there's this thing where it's like, well, nah, we did this. You ain't do nothing. And it's like sometimes I watch quote unquote black leaders, if you will, like on podcasts or YouTube. And I'm looking at like the little subtitle, and it'll be like such and such person destroys a black conservative. This person completely pulverizes. And I'm like, why is the interest in pulverizing instead of taking on a collective? Well, this is what you do. This is what you do. This is what you do. So long as we're all moving in the same direction, do we claim? Does it matter who's doing this versus who's doing that? I can see the criticism, like if you're doing nothing, but we all protest in different ways. But I think that so long as it's viewed as, and obviously I'm not saying you, but as long as it's viewed as, well, if you're not out here on the front lines, you ain't doing shit, then I think that almost detracts, if that's a word, from the overall struggle versus the protest aspect of it, if what I'm saying makes sense.
Right, which was a point that I was trying to make before, that there's a tendency to lionize frontline protesters and it's sort of militant protest, confrontation as the kind of height of what it means to engage in dissent and in struggle, right? But in order to be successful, any social movement has to have an infrastructure that allows it to coordinate its activities across time. So podcasts, whether they be formally a part of a particular protest organization, social movement organization, or whether they just be part of a network that operates in conjunction and in alignment with one another. Things like a podcast, newspapers, think tanks, these are also aspects of the struggle. So the reason, there's a couple of things at work. To the extent, number one, there's been an unfortunate tendency, in my judgment, for us to hold up militant confrontation as the ultimate expression of radicalism. And so to the extent that we believe that the only way to press our struggle forward is by having these radical militant confrontations with institutions of authority, we reduce the number of people. We make it unappealing, number one. We tend to devalue the contribution that comes from more quiet work behind the scenes, right, to get those channels of communication and administration functioning properly. But in addition to that, we also make it where so far as people believe that this is the height of militance and progressive action, you make it unlikely that people are going to do much of anything else.
Yeah, I hear you.
Numbers, because look, a lot of people you might hold up standing, being out there with your ready as the ultimate expression, but how many of us are actually
doing that,
going to make such a, you know, such a far-reaching sacrifice, the literal sacrifice of one's life on the field of battle, you know, a, a, a call for us to give our lives to the struggle, right? Such that we perish, you know, on the field of death, when in fact we should be giving our lives to the struggle so that we can carry it out over the course of several decades. That's a major difference, and I think it's hard to understate how unappealing that actually is, and it becomes almost impossible for people to attain that level of superheroism. I mean, Brian, I'm gonna be honest with you, I've sacrificed a lot of my life, you know, doing the things that I do. I mean, I could have made more money, but damn it, don't ask me to have, you know, now go out and have some, you know, suicidal confrontation with the police. Right? So, I think that kind of dissuades people as well, that from doing it. And I just, the real point that I want to add was this, is just like, listen, even when we have militant protests and stuff, a lot of times we're vicarious fellow travelers. We support in principle the things that people are doing. We, you know, give lip service to it, but very few of us actually participate, so that the protests and other kind of activities, you know, that we may engage in, everything is about, it's a numbers game. You got to have numbers out there. You got to have numbers out on, you know, in front of some damn government building, and you got to have numbers in your, you know, also at the ballot box. And to the extent that we always tell ourselves how much we did do, and it gives us permission to do less. Oh, we've done so much, and oh no, I'm not going out there again. You never been out here. What are you talking about? You don't come out here.
Do you think that the struggle itself, like in my mind, the struggle itself is reduced to when a black person is shot by police, or the struggle itself is reduced to the things that we can see, which is why the heroism is assigned to those that we can see? But I mean, the struggle are in the things that we can't see. Do you think that we're oblivious to the fact that there even is an actual struggle? I mean, outside of police shootings and those types of visible things.
The black community has focused primarily on the most overt acts of social injustice that play out on the pages of our public media. So what that means is that one of the unfortunate tendencies of the black freedom struggle that is, you know, made it particularly weak, it's very reactive. Something's got to happen to us for us to undertake the activities that we consider to be militant and will push our struggle forward, right? So right now there's been a lull in publicly covered killings by police officers, and we've seen a corresponding, my sense is that there's been a corresponding decline in the amount of activity to address the problem of police brutality, although we know what's going on. Someone probably being beat up right now as we speak by some out of control police officer. So the question is, how do we move the struggle from a reactive struggle, which largely awaits for social injustices to occur, to a more proactive footing where we are advancing goals that are designed to reduce the amount of police brutality we suffer from, for example, without waiting for someone to get beat up on. Like, what's there to do? How do we organize ourselves outside of having some immediate act of brutality to mobilize around. So and I think that's one of the major problems that we have, that we're reactionary and we're not proactive.
So, given what we've just and other things, what quantitative or qualitative measures do you use to determine the success of Rise Up?
Well, I mean, so it is a startup. It's a startup outfit. So I should say that. But
That's just it.
The measures that I use would be the extent to which we're able to successfully shepherd through and play a leadership role for important civic projects. So, for example, your brother and I and all of the persons who were involved in the Yonkers Solar for All grant application, which is looking very promising, I should say to the audience members, is a $50 million grant application in which we took the lead in putting together a coalition that assembled all of the material that's necessary for this grant. We consider ourselves successful because A, we've demonstrated that it's possible to assemble a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition in one of America's big cities in which everyone can cooperatively share their ideas to cooperatively share their ideas for how to solve one of the big problems that we confront, which is, carbon intense, energy, carbon pollution, local carbon pollution in our energy production system. So that's one way. We're involved, us and some of our partners continue the work to help Westchester make the clean energy transition by a number of additional grants that applications are now being prepared for. So one way to measure our success is our ability, A, to demonstrate the feasibility of Black people taking the lead in formulating programs that are designed to solve our problems through pilot projects of the kind that we just went through. And I want to say that just being able to assemble the coalition is in and of itself a form of progress. That is a form of success because, back to the question of, why Black people aren't more actively involved, because we actually don't believe that we would see a return on our investment when we undertake this kind of serious concerted action that requires some sacrifice. All the members of the coalition who were involved had to do an unwelcome amount of extra work during their leisure time to make the grant a success, and we had to put aside our distrust of other communities, primarily the white community, who we are fearful will always find a way to outmaneuver us, outwit us, and ultimately exploit us and leave us, have us help to put together a good project and see none of the return on investment. So one way is that. Another way, look, we're going to measure our success is whether or not we receive this grant. Even though that would be another criteria to measure the success of some of the efforts that Rise Up is involved in. Specifically what we do, although not Rise Up, I personally have been involved in a number of political campaigns across the years, and to the extent that I can put together an insightful research program that will allow us to participate in such public policy debates as the the boundaries of our congressional districts and whether it hurts or harms the interests of the black community. Whether I can help to put together research reports which help to identify strategies for increasing the number of registered voters. And, to the extent that I can give strategic advice to progressive candidates or candidates that I think might advance, a progressive agenda to one degree or the other on how to, succeed in the latest election, I make a contribution to that. Now we are a startup organization and we do have a fuller research agenda, itinerary, some of which is actually has been on screen for our viewers to look at for a little bit as we've had this discussion. And so for what I am currently working on now is publishing a series of digital maps and other kind of research reports, which will be the cornerstone of the data analysis that we do about life here in Westchester County. Right now, I'm working on some more politically related maps. But there's a series of maps that we'll be publishing in the weeks and months ahead that will begin to give us a sophisticated profile of the economic, educational, climate, and other kind of conditions of the black community here in Westchester County. So some digital maps, I'm doing, I do writing, been doing some writing of some kind that I hope to publish along with these maps. So we do have a research program, Brian, that we would like to begin to publish work products as a part of, and so that would be another way that we might we try to do what we're doing, and I must confess that there's more that ahead of us than behind us at this point.
Okay. Well, they have the I mean, it sounds like everything, especially given the. So was was it the $500 million grant?
$50 million.
$50 million. Was that the first? Was that one of the first initiatives of Rise Up, or just the most recent?
It was,
or the first of that magnitude.
It was actually the second of that magnitude that Rise Up took a lead role in trying to organize. In 2022, we were the catalyst behind an application from forces here in Westchester County for what's known as EJ Tic-Tac Centers, Environmental Justice Thriving Communities. It's environmental centers. Essentially, they're environmental centers. So we took the initiative to assemble a coalition of various community-based organizations, including Pace University, and others as well, to apply for an application to stand up a technical assistance center in our local EPA region, which is EPA region number 2, and that includes New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico. So I was, what could be the Virgin Islands? It might be Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. I'm confused about which of these islands were a part of Region 2. Slips my mind. But in any case, we actually were the catalyst to put together an application for one of these technical assistance centers in late 2022 in conjunction with Pace University, although we ultimately were not selected as the awardee, the recipient of that grant.
Okay, so it sounds like there are many more to come.
Yeah, man, listen, I mean, to the extent that we've got serious researchers, writers in the audience who have spare time on their hands that they might want to use to, put together some lasting solutions to the policy challenges that Black folk confront. I would encourage them to keep their eyes focused on grant opportunities in the area of climate justice and clean energy transition, because there are literally billions of dollars available right now. The Biden administration passed 3 multi-billion-dollar climate transition clean energy grant programs a couple of years ago, and so there's lots of money. I don't want to say we're awash in cash, but there's lots of money, and much of it is, a significant amount is pegged for disadvantaged communities that are ordinarily neglected by these programs.
So the more you describe it, the more I realize how vital and critical your work is for our community. So a lot of the work you do, because a lot of the work you do takes place kind of in the background or behind the scenes, if you will, does the work you do ever feel like it's a thankless job?
Oftentimes it does, because that type of laborious, detailed, monotonous, but nevertheless high level planning often goes unnoticed and underappreciated. Remember, I was saying before that, so today in the political imagination of the Black community, the real sort of height of resistance is some grand act of public defiance, which we will laud everyone for, by any means necessary. You know what I'm saying? When your life appears to be on the line, that's when you are often deemed to be your most heroic. So who in any way lauds, applauds someone who sits down and puts together spreadsheets and stuff? That seems to be an activity of an altogether different sort and something that's insignificant. And yet, you want me to tell what I was thinking about it, man? It's like this. Today, the contemporary Black community approaches politics. If politics is a sport, and it's America's #1 sport, Black America approaches politics as if it's a game of pick up basketball, pick up football. We spontaneously enter onto the field of play, the most competitive field of play possible, and without having any doing any of the preparation that's typical for any serious professional sports team. Just as when you play basketball or football in the professional ranks, there's a lot of planning that goes on ahead of time. People prepare a playbook. They actively do assessment of the performance of all their skilled players. They do assessments of the performance of the opposing team. And there's at least as many people, I'm sorry, and no matter how many people you have in the stands, you always have a sufficient amount of people on the field of play. And actually in politics, Black people lack most of the hallmarks of professionalism. We spontaneously enter into politics every year without having a clear strategy, not just for winning, but also for advancing particular goals and needs that are of importance to us. We don't have a regular staff whose main job it is to devote themselves to development of strategies for mobilization, as well as, the substantive issues that we have. And therefore, every election cycle, and in so many other areas, I will add in my judgment, the potential that we have as a people goes unrealized because we think that, when a person is out there fist up by any means necessary, that's the key to, waging a successful movement. And really, that's only part of it. Those acts of heroism are absolutely vital and can't be understated. But you need a person to organize the field of play for you and get people out there and the various parts moving in such a way that they're going to be effective. And no one appreciates that. No one really does, man. So, and probably the most significant thing is that it's very difficult to be able to finance such undertakings. It's very intense, laborious work. I'm finishing up a lot of self-training in the area of Microsoft Power BI. I mean, it's all self-taught, census data, files from the Board of Election. No one teaches that. There's no money for that. And it makes it especially difficult as a person is moving up the career ladder and they're choosing from various alternatives that are before them in terms of a career pathway. The one that's going to be most difficult to sustain is a professional organizer activist, because there's few institutions that will provide funded roles, positions for people to do this type of work. So we're in a real, we're in a real crisis, man. We're in a real crisis, and we've got to disabuse ourselves of the idea that standing up is the what is required in order to carry out a successful movement, because sometimes it's sitting down that's required, and to sit down in front of one's computer at night and do that planning, do the messages, all the stuff that takes place behind the scenes. So yeah, it often goes underappreciated and can be very thankless.
So I guess given you expressed the kind of the lack of funding, mm-hmm. the thankless nature of it, what makes you do it? Why do you do it?
Well, for me, it is because, and I didn't fully explain this when you asked me this some time ago, a couple of questions ago, but look, I arrived at a firm, clear sense of myself when I was an activist. And I was thinking that, you know what, to help you understand the significance of that experience for me, I'm going to draw on the work of the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor. In his recent book that he wrote called The Secular Age, he explores similarities between our time when religious belief has waned and past generations, past ages where it had a much more powerful effect on human beings. And he said, listen, today, fewer people experience an outright religious conversion, right, where they are born again, so to speak. The importance of the born again experience, whether it be Christian, whether it be in the Muslim faith, is that oftentimes it leaves the person totally transformed. If we want, we could sort of take the experience of Malcolm X. After he does his time in prison, he encounters the work of Elijah Muhammad, Minister Louis Farrakhan, and eventually he undergoes a conversion. He's born again, where he discards of all of his old behaviors and adopts a new posture towards the world, a new sense of mission, a new sense of person. He's not the same person afterwards. And in many respects, that's what happened to me when I became an activist. Although I didn't experience the conventional religious conversion, the same sense of being guided by some sort of transcendent force, and to feel that I had reached the height of my capabilities and capacities is such a satisfying experience that I continue to quest after it and continue to seek after it, even when it may appear to be elusive. For me, there's no, occupation, no role that allows me to draw together all of the different facets and dimensions of myself that I've developed over the course of a lifetime now, almost 6 decades. as a thinker, as a historian, as a research analyst, as a writer, as a entrepreneur. 'Cause I do have entrepreneurial ambitions, which is to say to try to monetize this so that we can have money to finance it and pay for our ongoing activities. And then and finally my sense of a leadership. I once said to a friend of mine when I was in graduate school, asked me what I wanted to do, and I told him I wanted to make history. I wanted to be remembered by generations in the future for having transformed the course of history in the present or their past. And to be an activist, to be an organizer, is to take on the challenge of making history. Not just in the personal sense that I'm going to be remembered, but I'm going to be remembered because the trajectory that my particular group or groups were on was altered in a positive way thanks to some of the things that I might have done. And so that's my hope, that I will still be able to make history one day.
To be honest, it's a breath of fresh air that people like you exist. They say that, I don't know who said it, but they say that the measure or the greatness of a society will be determined by the willingness of old men to plant trees under the shade which they'll never sit. And it sounds like that's the mission that you're on, is to plant those trees under the shade which you may or may not sit, but those trees need to be planted regardless.
Right. It's our gift to the future. And connects what we do today to some of the long-term consequences that only will play out years, decades, maybe even centuries ahead. So, yeah.
So, given the thankless nature, and having a better understanding of what you and the organization do, on behalf of myself and on behalf of everyone watching and on behalf of the community, we just want to say thank you for your work.
Well, I appreciate it, good brother, and I hope one day that the impact of my work will have earned your sense of gratitude.
I'm confident that it will be, with the energy and the vigor and the work that you put into it. I'm more than confident that it will.
Well, I appreciate the vote of faith, brother. Hopefully I will live up to it.
But so I won't keep you long. But before you go, I did want to run by, because what we normally do is we do a segment. It's called the Black Box segment, in which we would ask the guest to make a deposit of some wisdom, insight, advice, guidance for the black community that you feel, or any segment of the black community thereof, that you feel would contribute to the uplifting of the community as a whole.
Yeah, so I will say that collective transformation can only be attained through personal transformation. There's a inextricable link between the fate of the collectivity and of its individual members. And I say this because my life, if anything, is a testament to the need to exert continuous ongoing effort to attain the characteristics and the qualities that make for good, effective leadership. One thing that anyone who viewed this show should be aware of is that, listen, I'm, like everyone else, a deeply flawed vessel. And I've had to overcome my many personal limitations on the path toward trying to provide the kind of leadership that we need in order to successfully confront the challenges that are before us as a community. And there is going to be no way that we will attain that type of general goal if if people aren't willing to do the necessary work to obtain the qualities, the attributes that are going to make for, effective leadership. So a lot of times we're confronting our own personal demons and challenges, and it hopefully we begin to muster more discipline to do the work that's necessary in all the ways that are necessary. So if you want to provide leadership, there's a burning need for leadership, and at the same time, if you desire to do so, you also got to be willing to change. So that's my suggestion for the suggestion box.
And thank you for it. It's greatly appreciated. Like your time and energy, we greatly appreciate your deposit. So without, like I said, without wanting to keep you too long, I did want to thank you for your time, your contribution of time and energy. And I, as well as all of the audience, wish you all the best and wish the organization all the best, continued success, and thank you again for all you do.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian. I appreciate spending the time with you and your audience.
Anytime. Everybody, Dr. Robert Baskerville.
Pleasure to be with you.
And welcome to the They Didn't Believe You Either segment of the show. Given Dr. Baskerville's obtaining his PhD, I thought it appropriate to discuss another significant historical figure in that same vein. Mr. Edward Boucher was born in New Haven, Connecticut in 1852. His father was an enslaved person who worked at Yale University as a servant and a porter. Edward Boucher attended New Haven High School and graduated top of his class. He attended Hopkins Grammar School, where he studied mathematics, Latin, and Greek, where he also graduated top of his class. In 1870, Mr. Edward Boucher became the first or second, depending on whose account, but first or second black person to enroll in Yale College. Nationally, he was the first black person to graduate from Yale in 1874. Edward Boucher remained at Yale for an additional 2 years, and in 1876, he became the first black person in America to earn a PhD. But despite his effort, his intelligence, hard work, dedication, drive, determination, and despite his achievement, no universities would hire him as a professor because he was black. So after leaving Yale with a PhD, he went and taught chemistry and physics at the School for Colored Youth in Philadelphia. He worked teaching black high school students for more than 25 years. He retired and passed away in his childhood home in New Haven, Connecticut in 1918. So I just wanted to say peace to Mr. Edward Boucher, Dr. Edward Boucher, one of the countless people who chose not to believe the false negative narratives and the negative images perpetrated about black people, but he instead chose to succeed in spite of them. So we remember Edward Boucher, and we thank him because he didn't believe you either. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the We Don't Believe You podcast with your host, Brian McCoy. We hope you feel enlightened and empowered by our show. Please visit our YouTube channel at We Don't Believe You and our socials at We Don't Believe You on Facebook and Nah Don't Believe You on Twitter X. Please subscribe and share our podcast. Peace.